special Countdown Bulletin podcast. I'm Keith Olbermann. It began in February. They were already trying to overthrow the president in February. First, rumors that this member of his cabinet or that one might be a better nominee, that the peril to the nation was too great to let him run again. Then the admirers of one of his departmental secretaries went public and quickly got widely and publicly flattened, while the president made a speech that doubled or tripled his public standing in one fell swoop. Still, before spring was over, breakaways and radicals had formed their own third party and nominated their own candidate with a famous name, and by summer there were new crises and new calls for a new nominee and new panic and new stridency in the columnists and the editorial pages of the major newspapers, and even from a famous New York editor, to extract the president, who was thought to be mentally unfit, and even this late, so late, too late, to reconvene the party at a new convention and start from scratch and nominate somebody else. How? Who? Nobody had the faintest idea nor the vaguest of plans. It was panic, and panic does not need any ideas, and panic certainly does not need a plan, and so they wanted to unnominate the incumbent president of the United States in the midst of the greatest crisis the nation had ever seen. Joe Biden? No, I'm talking about Abraham Lincoln. I'm not making any undue comparisons here, except about the crises and except about the efforts to throw Biden under the bus this year and Lincoln under the horse-drawn bus in the year of our Lord 1864. It is absolute historical fact. The leaders of the Republican Party spent most of the first 8 months of the year 1864 trying to undermine, to sabotage, to purge and bury President Lincoln because everybody knew he was a little off in the head and he was damaged goods and he could never get reelected. And the cabinet member they liked was not obviously Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg, but rather Secretary of the Treasury Salmon P. Chase. Chase's supporters proposed that Lincoln step aside so their friend Sal could replace him. Party regulars rallied around the president. The third party that the anti-Lincolnists formed was called the Radical Democracy Party, and at Cleveland in May of that year, it nominated one of the most famous names in American political history, John C. Fremont. And when the first anniversary of Gettysburg came and went, and Union soldiers were still dying by the thousands, and there was no hint of when or if the Civil War would ever end, and according to every Republican leader in every city, in every state, Lincoln was too far behind the Democrats to win the election, the influential founder of the New York Tribune, Horace Greeley, began to make plans for a second Republican convention in September in Cincinnati to officially nominate a presidential candidate other than the one they already had, named Abe Lincoln. Fremont was a possibility, so was Senator Ben Wade of Ohio, and if these Republicans had gotten their way, they might have tried to talk Ulysses S. Grant into replacing Lincoln on the 1864 ballot, or at least supporting the new nominee, and things were so dire that on Tuesday, August 23, 1864, Lincoln wrote a note in his own hand, wrote at its top, Executive Mansion, Washington City, signed the note, sealed the note in an envelope, took it to the meeting of his cabinet, and had all its members sign the envelope without ever seeing the note. Secretary of State Seward, Secretary of War Stanton, Gideon Welles, Bates, Blair, Usher, Fessenden, all of them. Lincoln himself was convinced he was going to lose, and he was secretly and unilaterally pledging himself and his government to mitigate the disaster of an electoral loss and some kind of deal with the rebels, allowing the Confederacy to continue or slavery to continue or both to continue. And Lincoln wrote, "This morning, as for some days past, it seems exceedingly probable that this administration will not be reelected. Then it will be my duty to so cooperate with the president-elect as to save the Union between the election and the inauguration, as he will have secured its election on such ground that he cannot possibly save it afterwards. A. Lincoln." 11 days later, General Sherman and his Army of the Tennessee took Atlanta. The rebels fled. The Confederacy began a collapse that would take only 6 more months. The Horace Greeley internal revolt vanished. The Radical Democracy Party made itself scarce. Lincoln won re-election 55% to 45% and 212 electoral votes to 21. And between his management of the war and his management of the earliest moments of the peace, and of course, his martyrdom, he would soon belong to the ages as the greatest president this nation has ever known. Again, I'm not saying Joe Biden is Abe Lincoln. Just wanted to remind you that 160 years ago, right now, people surrounding the first-term president of the United States as the nation's future hung in the balance were desperate to get rid of Abraham Lincoln at any cost. Get rid of Lincoln because he was considered feeble-minded. Get rid of Lincoln because he couldn't possibly win re-election. Get rid of Lincoln because even though the election was just months away, it would be better to start from scratch, even this late, because why would you want Abraham Lincoln as your candidate when you could have Ben Wade or John Fremont, or maybe even, if you were really lucky, Salmon P. Chase? When the matter of trying to replace Joe Biden came up in February, I said I was agnostic, that I would carry him to his second inaugural on my back if he were the one who could again beat Trump, or I would personally throw him under the bus myself if it had to be somebody else, but that the real issue was that there was and is no procedure and no legal process to remove him from the ticket against his will. None. And oh, by the way, that there was also no alternate candidate who polled better against Trump than Biden did. Biden at his worst moment. And that was true as the debate started Thursday night, and it is still true right now. And oh, by the way, if you somehow succeeded in forcing him out and you did not replace him with Vice President Harris, you would have to force her out too. And in a best-case scenario, you'd have a lame duck president and a lame duck vice president and 2 other new guys on the ticket and an opponent just crazy enough to try to take over the government right now. And you would be giving up not just the greatest advantage any presidential candidate can have — the guy is currently president already — but you would also be throwing away the man who beat Trump. And all of this is still true. And all of it still means, well, yes, maybe you need a younger replacement. What are you going to do? Go and build one somewhere? And are you prepared for the outcome just in case it really could be something like 1864 all over again? And what you're actually doing is you're swapping in Salmon P. Chase for Abraham Lincoln? Well, we thought J.B. Pritzker was the answer. And the impact of Thursday's disastrous debate in the initial polling has been negligible. As I sat and watched and looked at how small Joe Biden's eyes appeared, especially since my monitor was about 120 inches in size, I thought, this could cost him 20 points. Now, wrong, Keith. CBS-YouGov polling released yesterday says even in the wake of the understandable blunt force trauma we all went through as we watched, 55% of Democrats have absolutely no interest in changing horses, while after the same debate, 54% of all voters say Trump should drop out. Trump, not Biden. Trump should drop out. Because the one silver lining of that debacle is Biden's virtual non-participation in the debate and the other headline, CNN's utter journalistic failure in not fact-checking him. They combined to permit the nation to hear Trump lie and lie and lie. And the nation's reaction was that same jaw-dropping look that Biden gave Trump after lie number, whatever it was, 27 in a series of 200. Collect them all. It is foolish to absolutely commit to anything until the swelling goes down and until the polling gets more extensive. But the early polling all suggests that the best thing to do right now is take as much of this July 4th week off as you can and have a good time and think. I am finishing my second battleground state poll post-debate, writes the Democratic pollster Geoff Garin, and both surveys show the same thing. The debate had no effect on the vote choice. The election was extremely close and competitive before the debate, and it is still extremely close and competitive today. Morning Consult and Data for Progress pollsters polled right after the debate. The percentages of those who think Biden should drop out went up like 4 points. But the Biden versus Trump matchup, Biden went up a point. In Survey USA, he went up 3 points. Translation? Yeah, maybe he should drop out. But Trump is an MFing liar and crazier than imagined. So if Biden doesn't drop out, I'm still going to vote for him. That's what's happening. The almost negligible impact on Biden's poll numbers may be as transitory as whatever it was that impaired the president during the debate, because his health and his age are baked in to the voters' perceptions of him and this race. There was nothing before the debate, nothing in his grueling international travels to the G7 and Normandy for D-Day and elsewhere and other events in the last 6 weeks. No problems in front of a microphone or a camera that were as bad as what happened during the debate. He was clear the day before. He was clear the next morning and every day since. And there is a plausible and intuitively satisfactory possible explanation for what causes a sequence, a timeline like that in an 81-year-old man. If the president had a cold, I don't know about you, but I'll admit to it. I've had colds in my life. And his hoarseness, that sounded to me like a cold. If he had a cold, the next question should be not, shouldn't he drop out immediately? The next question should be, did he take cold medicine? You know, over-the-counter crap. Just like Tylenol or something, cold medicine. The Yale School of Medicine professor, cardiologist, and head of outcomes evaluation at Yale New Haven Hospital Center, Dr. Harlan Krumholtz, wrote a piece for Newsweek. Biden's symptoms, he writes, are consistent with someone suffering from temporary, drug-induced cognitive impairment. Most people believe common over-the-counter cold medications such as Dayquil, Tylenol, or Advil to be harmless. While generally well-tolerated, these medications have well-documented side effects and can cause reduced alertness, diminished attention, poor memory, and reduced reaction time, especially in older individuals. He continues, these impairments are transitory but can appear consequential and alarming. Every experienced clinician has seen this effect thousands of times. The more likely reason for Biden's continued improvement during the debate was that the cold medications started wearing off. Trump misleads the American public in many areas, the doctor concludes, but one area where he may have inadvertently been correct was the role drugs played in Biden's debate performance. We need to know if President Biden took cold medications before the debate. End quote. Thank you, Dr. Krumholtz. And yes, somebody, if there are any White House correspondents listening and you know who you are, maybe you could ask the press secretary about cold medication. I believe it was my friend Dennis Leary, who you occasionally hear on this podcast, who once observed that they put the giant letter Q on the bottle of NyQuil cold medicine to give you something to read in the 3 seconds between the time you take it and the time you fall into a semi-coma. The point is, if that doesn't happen again, what happened in the debate is not likely to be decisive and not likely to be burned in remembered. That, of course, is not what you are going to think if you read the New York Times, which almost immediately ran out half a dozen different columns by different columnists, and then a really poorly written official editorial calling for Biden to drop out on behalf of the nation, completely missing the point of the debate, the one that was captured by the Philadelphia Inquirer's editorial, calling for Trump to drop out for lying without pause or remorse. The Times, which will not and has not called Trump's lies lies, has had no problem since Thursday calling in its news reporting the debate a car crash and Biden's distress the result of the lack of a teleprompter and other age-related issues and the reaction of the party to what happened, panic. Moreover, the Times has given away its actual motive for this demand that Biden drop out, and its actual motive is its own extraordinary pettiness and egotism, the chip on its arrogant, condescending shoulder. On Friday, the Times reporter Jonathan Swan let the cat out of the bag. He wrote, Biden allies spent 3.5 years saying the reason voters have such deep concerns about Biden's age is because the New York Times writes too often about Biden's age instead of, say, the magical power of sight and sound. The Times promptly wrote its own editorial calling for Biden to drop out, and it blew the horn to start the legacy media groupthink charge of the Light Brigade, and it was followed in that charge by exactly one other big paper. And off they went at full speed right over the edge of the cliff, the Horace Greeley Let's Dump Lincoln cliff. The Times doesn't give a good goddamn about Joe Biden or America. The Times wants Joe Biden to be too old because it will validate its previous guesswork and bullshit reporting that he's too old. NBC, which has done a lot of the same stuff, then scooped that there would be a Biden family summit, an intervention of sorts at Camp David, a solemn gathering Sunday of what those morons Mike Allen and Jim Vandehei at Axios so pompously referred to as the Biden oligarchy. Turned out it was an intervention with makeup and a photographer. In fact, it was not an intervention. It was just makeup. And photographer Annie Leibovitz. Annie Leibovitz was taking shots of the entire Biden family on Sunday. The solemn, history-changing conclave of the oligarchy. The intervention was a photo shoot.
He didn't look good in the photo shoot. He should drop out.
You know what Mike Allen and Jim Vandehei and NBC News and the New York Times need? They all need to chug a few bottles of NyQuil. One more thing. Data for Progress also polled possible replacements for the president. CNN, following up on the debate night abrogation of every tenet of responsible journalism, inaccurately called this internal polling. While obviously Data for Progress is a liberal company, it's got progress in its name after all. It is not internal polling. Where did they get that wrong info from? Dana Bash and Jake Tapper? As of Friday, asking respondents, how would you vote for president if the election had been tomorrow, Saturday? Biden and Vice President Harris, as of that point Friday, right after the debate, both would have trailed Trump 48-45. Buttigieg loses 47-44. Cory Booker's at 44. Newsom, 44. Whitmer. Klobuchar at 43. Shapiro, 43. Pritzker, 43. So you want to trash Biden and the value of being the incumbent president that Biden brings and of not having Trump, an ex-president, going against a rookie candidate, you want to throw that out to get, at best, the same result with the vice president? Or something worse with the others? And oh, by the way, you want to open up the chance to be president to a bunch of politicians, and you expect they will all sit there calmly and wait for their number to be called? And they'll just talk it out among themselves to see which one of them gets it, rather than, say, hitting each other over the heads with baseball bats so that they will be the only candidate left. On the other hand, if there is something wrong with President Biden and it was not a cold and it was not cold medication syndrome, and you wind up with no other choice but to do a Lincoln Greeley Salmon P. Chase, and you wind up having no other choice because the president decides for himself he's not well enough to continue, there's 8 other options that would start off at pretty good against Trump and might be built up to victorious over the span of a couple of months. But until and unless Joe Biden chooses to go, all things considered, if he were to say to me, you know, pal, I'm thinking maybe I should bow out for safety's sake and party unity, and at that point, I'm going to interrupt Joe Biden, and I'm going to, at this point, try to talk him out of it. As a postscript, I will note that I think an interaction I had with the now president while I was moderating the Democratic primary debate in Chicago in 2007, and he was still a senator, underscores that he is just stubborn enough to have been told, whatever you do, do not take any Dayquil or anything in the hours before the debate. And he'd do it anyway. But I'll tell that in tomorrow's full edition of the Countdown podcast. It's just an element of verisimilitude. When I heard maybe he had a bad reaction to daytime cold medication, I went, oh, God, of course. I'll tell you the story tomorrow, by which time we will also have the Supreme Court ruling on presidential immunity, which can, of course, make this entire debate academic, since if Alito and the other scum actually invent presidential immunity on Monday, Biden can turn around and arrest them. And he can arrest Trump, and nobody could touch him. Oh, and he could arrest those weasels at the Times, too. And while you're at it, go back and arrest Horace Greeley. I'm Keith Olbermann. I'll be back tomorrow. Until then, good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.